thank you everyone for joining us. It's day 4 of the Gaucho Professionals Expo. And we're really excited to be here virtually with you all. We held this event for the first time in LA last year, and we were intending to be in the Bay Area this fall, but now we've moved everything virtual, and we've got, we're on day 4 of 10 days of great programming, great alumni speakers. So just really excited to have you all. A couple of quick housekeeping things. Everyone's on mute right now, but feel free to turn on your camera so we can see you out in the audience. You can type questions for our presenters in the chat, and then also feel free in the chat to introduce yourself and let us know when you graduated, what you're doing for work now, where you're tuning in from. But other than that, we're excited to have you all here today. I'm going to turn it over to our alumni moderator, Lewis Thompson, and then he will take it away. Thanks.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lou Thompson. I graduated with my master's in electrical computer engineering in 1996. I currently live in the Bay Area and work in cloud applications at Oracle. And my 2 panelists, I'll start with you, Hong.
Sure. This is Hong Tan here. I grew up from China. I came to UCSB for PhD study in computer science in 1997, graduated in 2004. I'm currently a venture capitalist in a small VC fund called Xingqiu Ventures.
And Sandeep, over to you.
Hey, I'm Sandeep Gupta. I graduated in 91 in electrical engineering. I currently reside in the Bay Area, like a lot of tech people. I work for Amazon, where I lead Fire TV. Hopefully you guys are all using Fire TV for your streaming needs. If not, you can drop off now. It's totally fine. But very excited to be here to chat with everyone and have a good conversation.
Okay. Well, Sandeep, since you're speaking, why don't you give a quick summary of your career and your experience, and we'll hand over the same.
So I graduated in 91 as a EE, but early on in my career at UCSB, I realized I didn't quite enjoy hardware. And I kind of pivoted a little bit to software development in my senior year. And then when I graduated, it's hard to believe, but in 91, there weren't a lot of jobs for software engineers. And I think it was a very different time. And I actually started off as a receptionist, as a contract receptionist, because that's the only job I could get. But then after that, I was able to get a contracted job at Apple, where I worked on tools and compilers, became a full-time employee there, and then worked in compilers and debuggers and overall development tools, software development tools for the next 5 to 6 years. And then in 97, I moved to a company called DigiDesign, part of a group called Avid Technologies, where they do digital audio workstations, where I developed software and workstations for pro audio users and mixers and overall music production and film composition. Ironically, my son now, who's a music major in New York, uses those exact software and tools for all of his work. So it's kind of an interesting kind of circle of life thing. After that, I returned actually to Apple in 2005, where I led the iPod software teams, developing iPod video, nanos, and then also worked on the first iPhone that we launched in 2008. From there, I went to Yahoo, where I led mobile app development for all their properties, finance, Flickr. Is Flickr still around? I don't even know if it's still around anymore. It is, okay, just wasn't sure. Fantasy football, so a lot of different, and that we did the first iPad apps as well. It was a very interesting time for application development. It was all new. I did a brief stint at a startup in New York, just to say I did. And then since 2011, I've been at Amazon, where I first led software development for the Fire Phone, tablets, and then for the last 5 years, really focused on Fire TV and the Fire TV programs, including our recent smart TVs. So that's a broad sort of path of my career in terms of where I worked. But basically, I started as a QA engineer, then became a software engineer, then became a dev manager, and then a director. And then now I oversee product, dev, and well as business and marketing. So kind of a broader role, kind of expanding from starting as tech, going into a full kind of GM role. So that's kind of my path and kind of where I've gone of my career.
Okay, thank you, Sandeep. And Hong, how about for you?
Yes, really glad to have a chance to be here and meeting so many UCSB alumni. I was actually born and grown up in China. I came to UCSB for PhD study right after I got my bachelor's degree in Zhejiang University. Like I said before, that was like 1997. My initial research area was high performance computing under Professor Tao Yang. He is still there. And in the middle of my PhD study, that's about, I think, 2000, Tao co-founded a search engine startup called Tioma with his advisor in Rutgers University. The reason we joined was because initially we just wanted to apply some of the HPC optimization techniques to the link graph solver. So that's kind of the core of the search engine. But I was quickly drawn to the system aspects of the entire search engine. So like the crawling the web pages, processing them, indexing them, and serving them in real time. So I actually pivoted my PhD study and started working on how to build the reliable and scalable internet services. So that's happened to be a period that there's a lot of internet startups coming up. So naturally, after I got my PhD, it was almost like a no-brainer for me to join back to Tioma. And also at that time, Tioma was being bought by another company called Ask Jeeves, and later they rebranded to Ask.com. Also at that time, the search engine team was in the East Coast, and I want to live in the West Coast in Silicon Valley. And because of the trust I already had with the people, they led me to go off on my own and build an R&D team. So that's pretty rare, I would say, for me as a newly grad and have the chance to just doing a lot of things independently. And I built a team from scratch in Campbell and basically rewrote the core offline processing infrastructure for Ask.com. And then gradually I also assumed a few other responsibilities. In 2008, Ask.com decided to license Google's main search results and then not putting more resources into the development aspect. So I decided to leave Ask and join the Yahoo. So maybe that was a period I think Sandeep and I may have some overlap there. I was in Yahoo's Hadoop team, but it was also a challenging time business-wise and also because of financial crisis. And also Hadoop team faced a lot of brain drain because other internet startups like Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter all wants to hire Hadoop engineers. So in 2010, I realized I wasn't happy at Yahoo and joined the Alibaba Cloud. So that was actually a newly created a business unit in Alibaba Group. And they have pretty big goal, basically to build a technology infrastructure for both Alibaba's own business and also for Alibaba's ecosystem partners. I spent 8 years there. I led the founding engineering team and built the technology foundation of Alibaba Cloud today. I left Alibaba Cloud in 2018 for personal reasons because I had 2 kids at that time, very young, and I wanted to spend more time with them. I found a role within the Alibaba Group as a technical advisor to our executive vice chairman, Joe Tsai. He's the owner of Brooklyn Nets. Because by that time, I was already on a path to be more broadly technology, in a sense, I want to be a technology generalist. And so that's a very good chance for me to be exposed and also to have a chance to learn a little bit about business and investments. Then the pandemic hit, and then I decided to leave Alibaba and spend more time with my kids. Now I'm with a VC firm called Xingqiu Ventures. It basically specializes in investing in early stage deep tech companies and has invested in 5 unicorns so far. So that's me.
Okay, thank you, Hong. And just to give you a little more background about me, as I mentioned, I graduated in '96. and I'm not going to be as long as these guys. And that's because, unlike almost anyone else I know in tech, besides the people who work for me, I've worked for the same company for 25 years. I didn't intend it to be that way. It's not that I haven't been interviewing and getting other offers, but I've been fortunate enough to always be on the leading edge of business applications, which is something I've been surprisingly interested in from the day I started 25 years ago. I've been responsible for dev, QA, et cetera. I'm currently group vice president responsible for basically a product area of HR payroll and making it global, making a single solution that looks like the right solution in each of those countries and allows me to work with people across the globe. It's been very exciting, but not the same path as our two panelists here today. So with that, why don't we get into some questions? And as Karen mentioned, I've got a list of questions I'm going to ask this group, but you're more than welcome to interject additional questions if I'm not getting to things that you guys think are important and would be helpful for you. So the first one is, if you could change something about your college choices to better prepare you for the career you've actually lived, what would those changes be? I'll start with you, Sandeep.
Yeah, and I think the path I took, it was interesting. Like, I always think when you start or you're in high school trying to figure out what you want to do, it's a bit of a crapshoot. I think there's some people that know what they want to do, but most people you're sort of guessing. And I think from my perspective, I was excited about tech. It was all very new back then, and I wasn't a big computer guy, but it was technology I thought would be interesting. I think that the thing, I ended up going with double E because I didn't quite understand software, but I think one thing I would have done differently is I do think I would have done more software and maybe more business, because I do think those two aspects make a big difference. First of all, software just appealed to me because I found it more creative outlet for myself in terms of what I could do. Writing software is very much storytelling in a way, because no one writes code the same way. Everybody writes it a little differently. And I kind of like the aspect of it from a creative standpoint. And in the business side, I think overall, as my career has moved on, I think it's one of those things where the benefits everyone to understand more about business, because at the end of the day, we don't do anything for just fun. There's a business aspect of it. We're trying to make money, whoever we work for and ourselves. So understanding more of those aspects, I think would just generally served myself a little better.
I can absolutely relate to that. I mean, having been an ECE major and then gone straight into database and software, I would have changed that path. Thank you. Hong, how about for you?
Yes, I actually got in touch with programming at a relatively earlier age. I was in the computer lab in the middle schools. I was really fascinated about writing programs. I wrote a lot of programs on my spare time. So I think the path I took in the college years were kind of pragmatic. I only do things I feel like that's very directly going to be useful right after my graduation. So looking back now when I'm doing investment, I think, and also when working in big companies, there's a lot of things not really technical related. I wish I could, first of all, taking some theoretical courses. I'm pretty good at math, but just that I just didn't push myself to learn more about math. And there were also neural network classes and AIs, even though they are kind of computer science, but I felt like at that time when I was in the college, it was too far away for me. So I really didn't take those classes. The other thing is that I also wanted to take some of the non-STEM courses. When I grow older, I feel like there's a lot of things you want to know about what's happened in the history and what happened by yourself, how you think, how other people think, like history and psychology would be something I would like to take. The third thing is I was actually pretty lucky to get into a lab doing some real work. At that time, it was object-oriented database management systems. But I wasn't really taking it seriously. I took some people's paper doing implementation. I never thought much about it. I wish I could be more serious and digging deeper in those opportunities. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Hong. And since we have you, I'll skip to the next question with you as well, which is, we've talked a bit about our education and our technology and what's caused us to get the skills to do our jobs. But what are some of the personal qualities that most enabled your career success? Is that team building, communication, etc.?
Should I go first?
Yes, please, Hong.
Yeah, I'd say for me, it's resilience and grit. I feel like I always have this big nerve, say, if I get some very harsh criticism or feedback, I could quickly go back to myself, not losing too much of sleep over it. Then I would shake off those negative feelings and try to figure out what exactly is behind that criticism. Okay, what's wrong? What I not do to meet that expectations? Then would be focused very much to fix it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think you have to be very introspective. You have to be able to look at yourself as you would any other person on your team and self-criticize and take feedback. Totally agree. And Sandeep, same question for you.
I think for myself, it's really been, I think my sense of humor and my sort of ability to not take things seriously has helped a lot. I think there's a lot of twists and turns in life and work. And, you know, I think it's very easy to get very caught up on sort of the next deliverable, the next program, the next challenge. And I think what's always served me well, and also in terms of helping the team, is like remind them that there is a life outside of work. You know, this is what we do, this is our career, and it's important. But at the end of the day, you have to enjoy what you're doing. You have to have fun with life, and you have to have fun in everything you do. And if you don't do that, then quite frankly, you're not going to survive very long in this industry because it's unrelenting in many ways. Now, of course, at times I can, some people who are serious don't always get what I'm coming from, but you kind of deal with that and work through them. And generally, I've made my way through it. So it seems like I did okay. So I think that's, but I think from my perspective, what I've done that's allowed me to survive and continue to thrive in the industry, just letting myself have fun with it and not letting some of the challenges or the tough moments get the best of me.
Okay, thank you, Sandeep. Okay, so the next question, and I think you can see it here in the panel. I'm a Native American, fifth generation. Sandeep, born and raised in London, Hong, China. It looks to me like we're working globally more and more all the time, with multiple countries being the reality, early morning meetings, late night meetings, cultural differences. How has this affected your career and how you work? We'll start with you, Hong.
Sure. Obviously, my experience with Alibaba Cloud offers me front seat row to witness this kind of globalization of the workforce. But on the other hand, I think my experience is not necessarily very typical because I was born from China, born within China, and I came back to a company which is also headquartered in Hangzhou. So in a way, I was kind of going back home, even though it's kind of like working in a global company. So to me, that experience, I would say both offers me a lot of opportunities and also offers me challenges. Opportunity-wise, I think there's tons of contrasts between China and the US, the way they work, and also the booming economy and the fast pace of technological innovation in the consumer side. It's very different, and I learned a lot with that experiences. And the challenge-wise, obviously, if you have a team, I always have a team, teams on both sides of the ocean, and managing teams in different continents is also a challenge. So before the pandemic, I still travel a lot, and that's probably the only way at that time to build and maintain the trust. I left the company during the pandemic, but I still think that to a certain degree, if a situation sides down, I still think a face-to-face meeting is something you cannot replace. But on the other hand, working remotely, getting people to getting used to the technology in the software industry, I think the tools we have today, email, IM, the video conference is pretty good when you get used to it. I didn't feel any kind of inefficiency other than managing a little bit of the time zone differences. The other thing I think I learned quite a bit is how to delegate and manage them. So you want to have, you don't want to have very tight grip of the remote teams. You want to create a local delegates who should be very good at communications down and up. And you want to empower them and hopefully listen to feedbacks. And you also want to strike a balance between the rules, what should be applied globally, all the teams, or locally. You let them have some way to fit their own ways of operation. And you want to make sure the communication is very open. In my case, actually, what happened was the team in US would be a little bit more insecure than the team in China. So you want to making sure all the communications are happening in timely ways, very open. Don't second guess what's behind the motivation of certain decisions. And you should be aware of the cultural differences. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Sandeep, how about your perspective on that?
I mean, it's very much, we live in a global world, to Hong's point, and the world's really changed a lot over the last 20 years. I mean, there's COVID and there's pre-COVID and post-COVID, and I think it's very different worlds we live in. But I think one thing common theme is that it's a global world, and, you know, product development, software development is very much a global, global program right now. You know, we do a lot of consumer hardware products. I've done that most of my career. A lot of manufacturers been in China and Asia. And, you know, there's a lot in the relationships, Tom's point. Like, you do spend a lot of time meeting with partners. I did a lot of traveling to Europe, Asia, meeting with partners and product leaders. And it's almost like, it's not the meeting, it's the dinners where everything comes together. And I think that's the key thing. It's hard to do we do happy hours like this. It's just not the same, though, to be honest. Like, it's virtual happy hours, not the same as a happy hour together. And there a lot of relationship and partnerships really come out of that. And I think that's the part we miss right now. But I do think the virtual experience from an execution standpoint works pretty well. You know, we've all been full-time online for the last I don't know, 7 months. And it's going to probably continue to flow through to next summer. And it's been interesting to see how well people have adapted. You know, pre-COVID, there was always the concept that, well, people had to be in the office together, or they had to be in a room together, and they had to be able to managers had to be on site. And that's all changed now. And I don't think that's ever going to come back that way. I think we've recognized that people can be very productive online, both locally and globally. You know, we spend a lot of time, you know, we have teams in Europe and Asia, and we spend a lot of time on VC in different time zones. But I think what has been nice about the virtual experience is that because of where we are, everyone has the same level of communication. So there's not like someone's in the room and then someone's on VC, everyone's on VC. So the nice thing is everyone gets to be in the room. You know, just like Hamilton, you want to know what happened in the room. And the room now is virtual, so everyone gets to know what happens in the room. And I think that's been a nice adjustment in some ways, a benefit of everyone being purely virtual and why it works. I think the challenge will be is when we go back to some people being in the office, some people virtual, how's that going to work, and how are we going to make that work so you don't go back to the haves and have-nots of communication. I think that'll be interesting. But I don't think we're ever going to go back to a place now where everybody's in the office all the time. I think that's past. And I don't think that ever comes back.
Yeah, I think those are all really good points. I mentioned earlier, I built software that's meant to be international. So my team spread across 20 countries. And I think if I just look at metrics like the amount of code being put into source control, number of bugs being fixed, all that, those metrics have actually come up and people are doing more. But then when it comes down to big design things where, as Hong mentioned, you want to get in a plane, you want to build trust, you want to look people in the eye, you want to see if you've upset them through body language. You can only do so much of that through Zoom. And I do miss that portion of it. But working globally as we are, we'll get back to getting in airplanes and having those dinners that Deep mentioned.
Yeah, and I think it's a balance, right? There's execution, there's relationships, there's bonding. Like, you know, we're people, we need contact, we need trust. And the big part about this is it's not always easy to build trust. I know it's a strange thing, and maybe it'll change, like without looking someone in the eye, non-virtually. I don't know what that means, but I think there is something to that, whether it's energy or feeling that just comes that's slightly different. And I think we'll see kind of how that evolves going forward. Maybe it becomes a generational shift, right? I don't know, but I think we'll see how that sort of evolves over time.
Yeah, completely agree. I actually watched my daughter with her sophomore year internship this last summer, did it completely remotely. She never met any of the people she worked with FaceTime and managed to build relationships and trust over that 10 weeks. So it may be generational to her. It just seems normal.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question. What are some of the events and trends that surprised you the most to date? and how do they affect your career? We'll stick with you on that one, Sandeep.
Yeah, and I think the one I'll kind of point to that surprised me, internet, I kind of felt like it made sense. It was kind of coming, just goes to show how old I am. But one thing that I think surprised me was when I was working at Apple, I was working on iPod and iPhone, and I wasn't sure if the iPhone was going to work. And I think it was one of those things where when we were developing it, first of all, we didn't have any concept of apps. We were never going to have an app store because Steve hated it. And so I wasn't sure, is someone going to buy this big device with bad battery life that's heavy and very different paradigm. And I think what has surprised me and surprised a lot of us, quite frankly, surprised everyone at the company, that is how much it resonated with people and how quickly they adopted and understood the metaphors and how to use it. And then once we did end up putting an app store on it, how that kind of just took off, and how developers just really got on board and created this whole ecosystem and kind of changed what we expect from consumer products, really. Because, with the iPod, we kind of tried to make technology transparent. I think it was the first time where people started to have the end-to-end hardware, software kind of integration where it felt like a fully integrated product. And I think the iPhone took the next step further. But I think since then, what it's done to the industry overall is change what people expect from a product. All the way to now where even with Tesla and cars, people expect to get software updates, to be customized, to be personalized, to appeal to myself. Like, these are things would be unimaginable 10, 15 years ago, that you would have that kind of ability or that kind of demand. But now it's like expected. And I think that's kind of one of the things that's changed really fast and a lot faster than what I expected.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, it's been the same thing in my industry, where suddenly it goes from everyone has a desktop to everyone expects everything, absolutely everything, to work on their phone. So Hong, same question to you.
Yeah, so there's just so many things happen in the tech world that always surprises me, because you look at a certain products, you expect this is how it should be. It could be a very competitive area, but somehow it always goes beyond my imagination. So that becomes something like I will stop being surprised of being surprised. So that's one thing. But there is one other thing, not necessarily related to technology, is to me, I was really surprised. When I came to US from China, I was expected this open, multicultural, democratic nation, right? So what's really surprised me in the recent 2-3 years is the geopolitical tension, particularly between China and the US, particularly because I was born in China. So that put me kind of in a hot spot. I'm not a political person, but really the pace how it turned really surprised me. And I also felt that it seems like the upper level there seems pretty ignorant about the global nature of today's economy and the technology innovation. And I talked with all my friends, whether they were from China or not from China. It seems to be clear this is a lose-lose situation for both sides. So that's really the biggest surprise I kind of witnessed in the recent years. And I didn't expect that it could become such a bad situation. And for me, how it impacted me, I think there are certain negative impacts on the VC side. Obviously, there's not going to be many Chinese investors into our firm. And startup founders may have to choose whether they want to start in US or China. If they choose to start in China, then we lose opportunity to invest them because we are US found. But I'm still optimistic. I don't feel it's going to be a long-term thing. So we will manage it. We think we will overcome it.
Yeah, I was personally and directly impacted from that China tension as well. I started the China Development Center in your hometown of Suzhou when we got it up to about 150 people. And over the last 12 months, we've been forced from a corporate perspective to come out of China. So wow. I've had to shift the focus to Mexico and expand my team in India. And you're right, it just happened incredibly quickly. So, yeah, totally agree. Okay, next question. And by the way, I'll again encourage people who are attending to send additional questions through. We should have time for them. The next question. So for me, I've been building business applications, and we started out with client server and shipping tapes and disks and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. You wouldn't believe it. The first release of software I worked on at Oracle, somebody had to actually get on a plane in the UK and fly the tapes to headquarters, something unimaginable now, right? But over the years, we've gone through many changes. The most recent significant change is the change to cloud. And that is similar to what Sandeep mentioned. When you're delivering cloud applications, people aren't expecting to get disks or download updates. They're expecting things to change, just as Amazon does for you day to day. They improve things, they move menu items around, and they don't send you documentation. They expect it to work out of the box and be intuitive. So those are things that have kind of fundamentally changed the way I work and the way my teams had to work. What major trends do you foresee, and how do you expect that to impact your career going forward? I'll give Hong a break and go back to Sandeep.
Okay. Go ahead.
I think one of the things I think is going to be interesting over the next decade is to see how people, we touched about remote and connectivity, everything else. How does everything that we're doing today change how people sort of interact with the world? I think one of the things that's been interesting with COVID is we've seen a transition to how people do things generally, right? They are much more open to online. You're seeing acceleration of things like cord cutting, which is big on my business, doing more exercising at home, cooking. Like I think generally things are happening more virtually every day. I think what's going to be curious over the next decade is how that fits into the next iteration of the digital world. How are people interacting with people? Is there more virtual interaction? It's not clear movie theaters will survive. It's not clear malls and offline retailers will survive. So I think what's going to be interesting to see is how technology continues to connect and have us have semblance of a life that we recognize using technology and doing it from our home more than ever. I think what I'm looking for to see how technology improves on things that are happening. We're doing things like watch parties now. Is it going to be virtual movie theaters? It's going to be interesting to see how we kind of revisit some of the ingrained paradigms in the world that we've had for decades in a new world where we're going to be connected differently. We're going to connect with different people in different ways, and we're going to want to do things in varying different ways as well. And I think the key there is going to be how do we continue to push what technology does and how it becomes more friendly for users. I think voice over the last 2 to 5 years of voice control with things like Alexa and Google Home have really changed what people expect from tech. And I think that'll continue to happen where, we still use keyboards today, but how much longer are we going to use keyboards? Touchscreens, the touchscreen is going to be here forever. And I think what's the interesting thing to see is because the world of what we want to do in our homes with technology is continuing to grow, this cognitive overload to what the input mechanisms that we have today can do, right? So we have to come up with new ways of doing that, whether it's AR. I'm still not bought in on VR. I know people like it, but I haven't really figured out where I'm going to ever get into that. And then maybe that's just I'm too old. But I think it's going to be interesting to see how tech bridges the next iteration of how we interact with the world.
Okay, yeah, no, I would agree. And actually, was tying that to something you mentioned earlier that I hadn't really thought about was the whole equality nature of working from home and how much that's going to persist. But I like the idea of having everyone be in the room on equal footing and not having increased access. Home, over to you. And I'm going to put myself on mute because part of the home office, the leaf blower is coming up close.
Sure. This is a really big question, I would say. So when we look at first of all, because we mentioned cloud, when we look at cloud, I think it's really, I would say something really pervasive, the cross-cutting across many sectors. So it's a huge transformative technology. So before cloud, maybe there's only a few would qualify, like mainframes, PCs, internet, Web 2.0. Then this is cloud. So basically, as currently as I am in venture capital investments, we always try to look into various trends. There are tons of interesting technologies, but I try to set a higher bar. So what I want to say, number one thing is, so I actually have to omitted quite a lot of very interesting technologies. For example, autonomous driving, even though it's really, I think it's gonna happening, but I think it only affects transportation logistics, not necessarily cross-cutting all places. I may also want to exclude the technology that Sandeep mentioned, like AR, VR, or voice interfaces. Those are also great technologies, I feel, but I think they may not be in the caliber of how cloud transform everything. But still, I think number one, I still think that I would still say in the foreseeable future, cloud is still a trend. It's not over yet, and on the contrary, because my opinion could be quite biased, I think it's just started. And if you look broadly at the cloud as process of digital transformation, and Sandeep also mentioned that essentially a lot more things would go into virtual. And in that regard, most of the world today is not digitized in the virtual. COVID-19 would accelerate this process. And also we look at cloud, if we look at the future of cloud, not necessarily today, infrastructure cloud, you should look into the cloud being more intelligent, extended to edge devices, and it could be much more secure. So I still think there's tons of things, there's continuation in the cloud evolution, and it's gonna be something gonna happen that beyond our imaginations. And the second broad and transformative technology trend I can think of is robotics. Basically, it would revolutionize all the sectors currently heavily dependent on human labors, right? Such as agriculture, energy, healthcare, logistics, and manufacture, and many others. So there's obvious bottlenecks there, how to have robots work safely with the human beings, the energy aspect, the power aspect, the barrier technologies, new materials, sensor technologies, etc. There's still a lot of things related to robotics, but I'm more optimistic. I think it's going to happen in the near future. The third one I can think of is actually blockchain. Today, if you look at it, a lot of big tech companies acting more like an IRS. Essentially, they take a cut of every financial transactions. I don't mean say they try to squeeze all the money from their partners, but it's a fairly opaque process, and you really don't know how they set the pricing, how they take the commissions, and also you don't know how they're gonna make use of all the information they gather. And oftentimes their success, the platform success, does not translate to the success of their individual ecosystem partners. So I think blockchain has a lot of promise to disrupt these kind of things. Obviously, we've seen that blockchain has been largely talked about to disrupt the financial sector, but by and large, I think it could move on to other platform economies like e-commerce.
Okay, thank you, Hong. Well, Hong, I'm gonna stick with you for the next question again. We all have to make decisions as we go through our careers, our first jobs, whether to leave a company, whether to change where you are within a company. Yeah. What was one of the most significant decisions you had to make with respect to your career, and how did you make it?
Yes, when I look back, the biggest single decision I've made in my career was joining Alibaba Cloud. So at that time, I do have multiple choices. The chief one I was comparing with is an offer from Facebook. So let's look at first what's the risk factors of joining Alibaba. First of all, it's in China, and at that time, Alibaba was not known as a technology company, and the team was very young. I heard some bad things about how chaotic the engineering runs. And also, even though I studied for years in Hangzhou, but that was a long time ago, I have no friends in Alibaba at that time. And looking at Facebook, quite the opposite. I've been quite used to the life in US. I have tons of friends in Facebook. But the other thing that I don't like about the offer from Facebook is that they don't tell me about what I would work on. I would have to take on a few months boot camp, then they would tell me what I work on. And for me, I somehow like the certainty. I want to work on infrastructures. I did all my studies, but now these evidence coming together could sway me one way or the other. There's not sufficient evidence for me to make a clear choice. In the end, it's more like a gut call. I later read from somewhere basically saying that none of the biggest decisions in your life, for most of us, that can you really be fully prepared for. There's not going to be sufficient information for you to do it. In the end, you just pick one from the bottom of your heart and just don't look back and try to make the best of it. And willing to say, okay, if this fails, I will live with the results, but I will put my heart in it so that I actually always would have a lot of learning from it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think either one of those choices would have led you to a successful career, really. Well, no bad choices there. Sandeep, over to you. Same question.
Yeah, I think I was just trying to think through some of the choices you made. I think one that comes to mind, kind of both entry and exit, was my second stint at Apple in 2005. I was there from 2005 to 2008. And I think, the thing that challenged me at the time was, my kids were younger. I had can't remember what it was at that time. It would have been a 2-year-old and a 7-year-old. And you just kind of thinking through sort of, should I go to Apple at that time? Because it would have been pretty hectic and stressful, and I had a pretty good job. But I think that the choice at that time was, it really felt like they were on the edge of doing something great. Kind of the iPod was starting to come out. And, I already had a passion for Apple since it was my first job out of college. So I kind of struggled with it. I actually ended up going through like 2 or 3 rounds of interviews, and it was pretty stressful. In the end, I got the role and I enjoyed it. And I think it ended up being a good decision to go. I think in that first year that I was at Apple and iPod, I probably learned more in that year than I have my entire career since or before then. It was kind of a very intense time at the company, and I learned a lot, and it was uber stressful and painful, but at the end of it, I learned a lot. So I didn't regret taking the role. I thought it was very helpful for me to grow my career. And the lessons I learned during that period have shaped the rest of my career to what I've done at Amazon over the last 8 years. And really kind of set a bar for knowing how much I can handle. And quite frankly, everything since then has been pretty straightforward and easy, because I don't think I've ever experienced that kind of stress again. But I do think it did lead me to 2008 when I left. And I've thought about, like, should I have left Apple at that time? I was doing really well. It was really taking off. But I think the challenges I faced then is that that's where I had to balance sort of my work life sort of thing. And my kids were at a young age. I was working pretty much straight all summer, so I spent no time with them. Quite frankly, the only time I spent with them was when they came into work to visit. So, and that was one of the other trade-offs I made, where I trade off some career success in order to spend time with family. And it's one of those things you'll do as you go through it. The strange thing about life or whatever is that at the exact same time that you're trying to build a career is the same time you're usually raising your kids. And I think it's really makes that time very hard. And I think we all go through this sort of understanding, what are the trade-offs? Where do I put my time? And you have to, they're tough choices. And you always try to do what you think is right to balance, but you have to end up having to lean one way or the other generally. And what you want to make sure is that when you come out of it at the end, and I'm kind of out of it at the end now since my kids are both in college and pretty successful work-wise. Did you spend the time you wanted to working versus being at home? And did you make the right choices? And do you have any regrets? And you just want to make sure that when you come out of it, that you feel like you were able to get what you wanted, and also your family got what they wanted out of that period.
Okay, great. Okay, well, I'm into my final question now. So in closing, and you guys can still ask questions on the bridge. In closing, what advice would you give to a graduating senior now about starting their first job? And Sandeep, I'm going to start with you. You and I both have kids that are really close to making that leap ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I definitely think it's a strange time for graduating and for um, job hunting and everything else. I think it's very challenging in many ways, but I also think it's very freeing in many ways because, quite frankly, there's the opportunity now to work from wherever you want for a company you want, and that flexibility. We're having these conversations now, like permanent working remote. You don't have to move to a city if you want to work for a company. So in that perspective, you have a lot more options for where you might want to work. Now, I think it's a tough balance because in the virtual world, especially early on in your career, you do want to start to make connections, know what it's like to form relationships. And we talked a lot about how those are done more person to person versus virtual. So I think it's a challenging balance because I think sometimes it may feel like you're able to get your work done and execute and learn. But there are aspects of it that you miss out on when you're virtual that are the soft skills, the sort of recognizing people and getting background and building, learning how to form relationships in the workplace, which is very critical for your success long term, is knowing how to understand different people, bond with them. So you want to make sure as you're coming out is that you don't forget that there is aspects of being in the workplace that still remain important. And you want to you do want to continue to build your technical delivery, your execution, but you also want to make sure you're building relationships and bonds because those, I still connect with people I worked with since my very, very early days at Apple. And actually a friend of mine is coming over tonight that I worked with back in '94. It's just those relationships continue and they'll help you throughout your career. So I think coming out as we go into more virtual world and you have virtual jobs, try not to forget that and look for opportunities to have that as well.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that point. I mean, part of what's made the pandemic and my work life easier, I think, is that the people I work with I've known for years and years, many of them 15, 20 years. And we've had a chance to build those relationships and those friendships. Hong, over to you. Same question.
Yes. So one thing I noticed throughout my career is that I found my learning and growth actually is always much faster in uncomfortable and even in adverse environments. My analogy is like this. So throw you into the water, somehow you can learn to swim. And somehow it's something, those kind of situations when you are back against the wall, that gets you more focused. And that somehow can tap into those vast reserves of potential. You don't know it's there. And somehow you would just improvise, kick into another gear, and somehow magically get things done and get a lot of learning from there. So, but when I look back into my own career, I felt like I never voluntarily put myself into those situations. Usually those situations are, I was involuntarily somehow got into it. So I guess my advice, and the way, if I look at my younger self, I wish I could have done is that take more risks and put yourself into uncomfortable situations, do something outside your comfort zone early in your career. And including, for example, just tag back on what the Sandeep said, right? So when you lucky enough get a first job and you have to work remotely, take the extra miles and don't limit yourself to say, okay, this is what I do, right? And if there's anything that may be beyond what's your current capabilities, but you want to give it a shot, you should just go ahead and do it. And also, you should be prepared to work in not necessarily regular work hours. Try to be responsive. Try to, even to a degree, try to over-communicate. In a sense, that's not just to build the trust, and also actually gives you ample opportunity for learning.
Yeah, I completely agree on your last point about transparency and availability and responsiveness. And I like your point about taking risks and trying new things because you don't know what you're necessarily going to lock in and sink in with. Okay, well, that was the last question. Hong, Sandeep, thank you very much for taking the time.
I've got some
We have
questions
some questions in the
for
chat.
you all.
Okay.
This actually, the first question in the chat, Lou, is a good segue from this wrap-up question that you asked. So, you know, you all three of you shared some great tips about relationship building and risk taking and making decisions and things like that. Sam in the chat is wondering, what are some tips you have, some practical tips you have for finding a job in tech during this economic contraction? So how do you know, lots of great tips of once you get there, but what are y'all thinking in terms of how to find a job right now?
Oh, Sandeep, I think you're speaking on mute.
Classic VC fail. Awesome. Someone had to do it. Glad it was me. I think right now, interesting thing about tech and hiring, there's definitely a dichotomy of hiring. I mean, you know, we've actually at Amazon ramped up hiring, and so have a lot of other companies. It's interesting to see is there's different areas, different teams. And one thing that I would look for is that we're doing a lot of virtual, what we called fairs and blitzes, where we talk to a lot of people at in congested areas. I think I would look for those sorts of opportunities because there is a lot happening right now. Broadly, I think the one thing that's been interesting about COVID is, you know, as we were talking earlier, is it's true overall there's contraction, but in a lot of areas of tech, there's actually expansion right now because we are filling in the gaps for some of the other areas. So I think you'll see a lot of that transition happening overall. So I think one of the things I would just continue to do is look at, you know, what are the virtual opportunities to connect with people, use your LinkedIn network, that also helps as well. And then just reach out to different companies about what they're doing in terms of broad job fairs and virtual events, because there are quite a few things happening right now in the industry to drive that kind of the hiring right now.
Yeah. The other thing that I would add is that, as has been discussed, personal relationships are important. And if you have people that are already in industry and they have experience and they're willing to stand up for you and put your resume forward, yeah, you know, I've always had great luck with recruiting referrals. Yeah. So use those relationships. That's definitely a way to get yourself in the door, especially when it's so hard to do interviewing now and you're not seeing people face to face. Having someone on your team who you trust and you like, stand up for someone, that's big.
Yeah, and we do a lot of virtual interviewing and onboarding now, and it's interesting. It's pretty seamless these days. You know, we actually kicked off a new campus in Virginia and hired a bunch of people, and they've actually never met, never been to the office. We do virtual happy hours, and they're all doing really well. So I think there's a lot to that, that I think there's still a lot that can be done virtually. And I think the nice thing about the tools that we have today to connect, like I can't imagine, could you imagine a pandemic 10 years ago? Like what would have happened, right? You know, we'd be all like, you know, living in a dark corner by ourselves. I think it's interesting to see how tech has allowed us to bridge this difficult period in unique ways. And I think that's going to continue.
I like to add one thing. So besides the normal preparations, you know, if you are junior, obviously you should take looking online, there's tons of interview related questions you could learn and try to, you know, refresh your skills. I think one important thing is actually try spend quite some time to dig into resume. Try to frame your experiences into some stories. And I think one of the things is because it's remote, I think it's very important that they want to hire a person. They want to hire an interesting person. So they want to hear your life stories. Don't just, you know, phrase your skill set as a list of keywords. And so that that would bring your character more clearly for them and whether you are a good fit for the team.
Great, thanks you all. And I think we're going to wrap it up with this one last technical question from Diane. So Diane has in the chat, we're starting to see the unsiloing of data as the adoption of SaaS tech. What are your thoughts on the potential of what we can do with that data? So your Cliff's Notes version to this answer. To this question.
Go ahead, Omar.
Yeah, I can start with that. Yes, there's a lot of data that that's being unsiloed. You know, people can have APIs to access data from different places. On the other hand, there is the situation where the regulation and everything, you know, you have to have privacy concerns, and the people don't want to have unconstrained access to the data. So from my perspective, there's some interesting technology trends that's coming up. They call it either confidential computing or privacy computing. So there's some kind of nifty mathematics there, or even hardware-based security to allow you to do computations on those secure data without leak the sensitive information. So the rudimentary form of this could be differential privacy. There's a lot of in the consumer space, try to do models and try to do analytics of the bigger trends people are already doing, like Google, Apple, pretty much every internet companies.
Yeah, Hong, I was going to say the same thing. I mean, with increased access to this data, we get increased regulation like GDPR in Europe, which has now been replicated here in California. So it's an interesting counter pressure, and the anonymization of that data and still get the value out of it. That's a trend I see going forward.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens, because more and more of our lives is so online and there's so much data, and then privacy continues to be an issue. And you know, I think that's one of those big hurdles we'll see, because there is a level of privacy can hinder technology, and I think that's where we'll have to figure out how do we balance those two differing efforts. Because unfortunately, sometimes technology inadvertently exposes, you know, kind of our data, and you know, a lot of it, you know, people say like, you know, is it done on purpose? Like a lot of it's just, you know, hey, we're all human, we're all make mistakes, and a lot of this happens by accident. But I think the fact that it's out there now makes it a lot more likely to happen.
Agreed. And I think now that the rules really have teeth, there's a lot more pressure on software companies and services to block it, because the fines are very real now.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time training to how to respond to privacy questions with the press, because it's just one of those things you have to be very crisp on.
Agreed.
All right, so that will do it for today. So thank you so much, Lou and Hong and Sandeep, for joining us. This is fantastic. It's great to get everyone together virtually. Just a couple of reminders for our attendees. You'll be getting a quick follow-up survey, I think in 30 minutes. So keep an eye out for that. Tomorrow we've got our Spotlight on Tech Founders session. On Monday we've got our Spotlight on Biotech Founders. Lots of great things happening with the Expo next week as well. So make sure to check out the rest of the schedule. And we heard a lot today about networking. Sandeep mentioned your LinkedIn network. And I'm also going to remind you one more time that we've got our LinkedIn style UCSB networking platform called Gaucho Network. And you can find thousands of alums in there who will be doing the same thing as our panelists have done here today, giving advice, helping you make connections, chatting with you as you're advancing your career. So we'll be sending reminders about how to sign up for that as well. But with that, I'll close things. Thank you so much again to Lou and Hong and Sandeep, and to my colleagues in engineering and in alumni affairs for helping out on the back end. And hopefully we will see you at one of our next sessions. Thanks.